Sylvester Three-Fingered Smith was one of Idaho's earliest settlers, a miner, merchant, rancher, and mountain man who spent decades living on the far edge of the frontier. From the first gold camps at Florence to the remote valleys of the Salmon River, Smith was part of nearly every major phase of Idaho's early history. He survived boomtown chaos, frontier violence, and the slow shift from wilderness to settlement. His life offers a rare, ground-level look at what it truly meant to build a life in the Old West. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name's Steven, and welcome to Wild West Deep Dives. Sylvester S. Smith was born in Virginia in 1829. By the time he appears in the historical record, he's already described as a tall, dark, and unmistakably a mountain man, one of those figures who looks like he belongs to the wilderness more than to any town. The nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life came not from a gunfight or some violent encounter, but from a brutal accident. According to multiple sources, Smith was standing and talking with a friend, resting his hands over the muzzle of his double-barreled muzzle-loading shotgun. His foot slipped off the fence rail and struck the hammers. Both barrels discharged at once. The blast was catastrophic, tearing away all but 3 fingers on each hand. From that moment on, Sylvester Smith became Three-Fingered Smith, a name that sounded fearsome, but was born from sheer misfortune rather than violence. Some later accounts claim that Smith worked for the American Fur Company and lived the classic life of a fur-trading mountain man before his later ventures. But that is unlikely. The American Fur Company began collapsing financially in the early 1840s and effectively ceased to exist by 1847. Smith would have been just 18 years old in the final years of the company's operations. It's not impossible that he brushed the fringes of that world, but it is highly unlikely. What is far more plausible is that he lived as an independent mountain man, hunting, trapping, prospecting, and drifting, long before solid records began to follow him. By 1861, Three-Fingered Smith emerges clearly into view in the newly discovered gold camp of Florence in what was then Washington Territory. Like nearly everyone who arrived there, he was chasing gold, but unlike most, he didn't rely on a single angle. Smith became one of the camp's earliest merchants, opening a general store alongside partners John Cretin and Ralph Bledsoe. That winter, the 3 men packed in some of the last freight before heavy snow sealed off Florence from the outside world. Isolation turned Florence into a pressure cooker. When supplies ran short and the number of hungry men kept climbing, prices exploded. Beans and bacon reached $3 a pound, about $110 today. Gum boots, for those who don't know, they're basically like muck boots, or rubber boots that kept your feet dry in the creek. Those cost $50 a pair, roughly $1,800 today. A 50-pound sack of flour sold for a staggering $75, roughly $2,800 today. And vegetables were simply unavailable at any price. Miners dug through 10 feet of snow just to wash enough gravel to buy food. And contemporary accounts note that desperation grew so severe that merchant storehouses were more than once threatened by mob violence. Yet Florence's reputation as a hard, dangerous camp did nothing to slow down the rush. Reports of gold pouring out of the claims only intensified it. Three-Fingered Smith himself owned what was described as one of the richest claims in the camp. Throughout that winter, he kept 3 rockers running constantly, each reportedly averaging, depending on the source, from $300 to $1,000 a day, roughly $11,000 to $37,000 in today's world. One reporter later wrote that it was common to walk into a miner's cabin and find gold dust piled in 8-quart pans, stored in whatever containers could be found. Oyster cans, yeast tins, even pickle bottles, filled in just a matter of weeks. By the time the snow finally broke, Sylvester Three-Fingered Smith was no longer just a wilderness drifter or accident-scarred mountain man. He was a proven survivor of frontier hardship, a merchant, a miner, and a man whose name already carried weight in one of the roughest gold camps in the West. By the summer of 1862, prospectors were no longer limiting themselves to the Florence Basin. As word spread and easy ground played out, men began pushing deeper into the mountains, following creeks and rumors into places few outsiders had ever bothered to explore. In July of that year, a small party led by James Warren set out from Florence to prospect the Salmon River country. Warren was described as a college-educated man and generally well-liked, though like many on the frontier, he had drifted into hard habits and rough company. After working their way along the Salmon River, the party turned south into the high mountain country. They crossed the river nearly due south of Florence and came upon a small stream running 7 or 8 miles through a broad, beautiful meadow. Once camp was established beside the creek, Warren began panning the gravels. The results were immediate and dramatic. Gold appeared in rich quantities near the head of the stream, and with that discovery, the camp that would bear his name was born. News traveled fast. At the time, Three-Fingered Smith was not even present. He was in Oregon, while his mercantile partners in Florence, Judge J.W. Poe and John Haynes, were among the first to act. Poe later recalled that as soon as word reached him, he sent a messenger racing to intercept Haynes, who was preparing to leave Lewiston with a 40-animal pack train. Poe himself was tied to the store and unable to go. Despite that, the rush could not be stopped. Thousands left Florence almost overnight. Among the earliest arrivals at the new diggings was Joseph Hines, who, along with a man named White, staked claims not only for themselves but also for Smith and Poe, including the discovery claim. In doing so, they effectively established the Warren camp. More men followed, claims spread up and down the creek, and soon several hundred miners were at work. When Haynes returned to Florence and then packed supplies back into the new camp, he earned the distinction of being the first merchant to bring a full freight train into Warren, arriving on the 8th of September, 1862. Around this same time, Smith's personal life was changing as well. While in Oregon, he appears to have married and started a family. By the time of the 1870 census, the Smiths were living in Warrens. His wife is listed simply as E. Smith, 22 years old, born in Oregon. The couple had 2 sons, Sam, born in Oregon in 1866, and Warren, born in Idaho Territory in 1868, reportedly the first white child born in the settlement. By 1872, Smith had moved his family away from the mining camp and onto a ranch at the confluence of Elk Creek and the South Fork of the Salmon River. Contemporary reports describe him with roughly 25 to 50 acres under cultivation, raising vegetables for nearby camps. Other ranches were springing up along the river as well, signs that some miners were trading uncertainty underground for the risk of permanent settlement. Those risks extended far beyond crops and weather. As settlers spread into isolated valleys and meadows, they were moving into lands used for thousands of years by native peoples. Ancient campsites became homesteads. Meadows once grazed by Nez Perce horses were cut for hay. In the high country, it became increasingly dangerous for indigenous families to hunt, gather camas, pick berries, or harvest bear grass. Encounters were often hostile, and violence frequently came without warning. Conflict was no longer a distant possibility, it was building steadily. By 1874, tensions had reached a point where Smith and other residents of Warrens signed a petition to the territorial governor requesting arms and ammunition to defend their families. When the Nez Perce War broke out in July of 1877, Smith was among those involved in escorting weapons back to the Warrens area. The Idaho Statesman reported, quote, "The party who came from Warrens to escort the arms lately shipped to Indian Valley from here for the Warrens people started on their homeward journey last Tuesday. They have with them 22 needle guns, 15 carbines, 26 revolvers, 1,250 needle gun cartridges, 680 carbine cartridges, and 1,920 revolver cartridges. Before starting, they took the needles and screws from the guns, so that if they should be captured by the Indians, they will be valueless to them." Now, if you're wondering what a needle gun actually was, don't worry, it has nothing to do with the modern construction tools that share the same name. The needle gun was a Persian bolt-action rifle that used a long, needle-like firing pin to ignite a paper-wrapped cartridge. That cartridge contained the primer, powder, and bullet all in one, which allowed for a much faster rate of fire than most muzzleloaders of the time. That speed, however, came at a cost. Needle guns were notoriously unreliable, the firing pins were fragile and prone to breaking, and mechanical issues were common, especially in harsh frontier conditions. Okay, let's get back to the episode. Although the Nez Perce were defeated later that year, the wars in Idaho were far from finished. For Three-Fingered Smith, the years of mining and merchandising were giving way to something else entirely, a life on the edge of settlement, where survival depended as much on preparedness as it did on reputation. In mid-August of 1878, violence came crashing directly into Three-Fingered Smith's life. Horses had been stolen from ranches in Idaho Valley, and on the 17th of August, Smith rode out with William Monday, Tom Healy, and Jake Crosscloves to search for the lost horses. The trail they found told a familiar story: sawed horses being driven by unsawed Indian ponies. The men followed it east for roughly 40 miles, reaching the falls of the Payette River, about 30 miles south of Payette Lake. By noon on the 20th of August, they had unknowingly ridden straight into a trap. The attackers were hidden among rocks above the trail, completely concealed. The first shots came without warning. William Monday, riding in the lead, was hit immediately and killed before the party even saw an enemy. As the firing continued, Healy and Grossclothes dismounted. Grossclothes was struck in the chest and turned to Smith long enough to say, "They have got me," before collapsing. Healy took cover behind a rock and called out for Smith to stay with him, but Smith understood the situation instantly. They were badly outnumbered, exposed, and under fire from an enemy they couldn't see. Still mounted on his mule, Smith turned to flee. As he did, bullets tore into him, one passing through his thigh, another shot crippled his mule beneath him. Now on foot, running for his life, Smith was hit again, this time breaking his arm. Despite his wound, Smith managed to get a head start. He reached a grove of pine and willow where he took cover and watched as the attackers gathered their horses and disappeared toward the divide between the Payette and Salmon River waters. Only then did he move again. In what later accounts described as the greatest effort of his life, Smith climbed back onto his injured mule and headed toward the Calvin R. White mail station on the Little Salmon Meadows. When the mule finally failed, Smith crawled the remaining distance, wounded, exhausted, and alone, on his hands and knees, and against all odds, he made it. A doctor was sent for from Boise, and a search party quickly formed. When they reached the mail station, they found Smith still lying on his cot, but alive and recovering. The doctor, before departing, reportedly remarked that Smith, quote, could not be killed with an axe. The search party then pushed on to the ambush site. What they found confirmed Smith's account in grim detail. The trail ran beneath a timbered mountain, flanked by sheer granite slabs that formed a natural fortress. From those rocks, the attackers had commanded both the trail and the open valley below. Monday's horse had been killed beneath him, but Monday had managed to fire back until his ammunition was gone. Healy fell next, followed by Grossclothes. No attackers were even seen during the fight, only the smoke and flash of gunfire from the rocks above. 14 spent cartridge shells were found around the bodies. All three men had fired until their belts were empty. Their bodies had not been touched, suggesting the attackers withdrew immediately after the killings. The trail leading away from the ambush was eventually found climbing into the mountains, but the men responsible were never captured. That is where the documented record ends and where the legend takes over. Local tradition holds that Smith recognized some of his attackers. After recovering from his wounds, he is said to have traveled hundreds of miles in pursuit of them. According to these accounts, he killed one man on the Lemhi Reservation named Chuck. He killed another man near the Blackfoot Reservation along the Canadian border named Booyer, and spent months searching Shoshone country for a third attacker, said to be Warjack, though he was never found. None of this can be firmly proven, but the story endured, adding another layer to Smith's already formidable reputation. In 1879, Idaho's final Indian conflict, known as the Sheepeater War, reached straight into Three-Fingered Smith's world along the South Fork of the Salmon River. I'm not going to spend much time on it here, since I covered the war in depth in the last episode. If you want a full breakdown of who the Sheepeaters were and how the conflict unfolded, I definitely recommend checking that one out. In short, that spring, two of Smith's neighbors, Hugh Johnson and Peter Dorsey, were killed. Later family accounts claimed the men had hired local Indians, but mistreated them and refused to pay their wages, an escalation that ended in violence. The killings occurred not long after 5 Chinese miners were found murdered on Loon Creek. Indians were quickly blamed, and together these events helped ignite what became the Sheepeater War. Federal troops were ordered into the wilderness to subdue Shoshone bands living in the high country. The campaign dragged on through the summer and fall of 1879, finally ending as snow began to fall and the remaining sheep-eaters surrendered at Big Salmon Meadows. Some of you may recognize the name Warjack. He was the figure who initially surrendered to Faro, helping bring an end about the broader surrender of the sheep-eaters. By the mid-1880s, Three-Fingered Smith was no longer a man defined only by violence and survival. When Aaron Parker, author of Forgotten Tragedies of an Indian War, and Three-Fingered Smith, a lone survivor, visited Warren's in August of 1885, he found Smith fully recovered from his wounds and, quote, as tough and wiry as ever. Parker described him as one of the earliest men in Florence, a miner who had once held a claim in Pioneer Gulch that made him a fortune. That summer, Smith was guiding 2 English globetrotters through the mountains and preparing to return to a ranch he had located along the Payette River, near the very place where he had nearly been killed in 1878. Parker called him a typical mountain man with a heart as big as his body. Ultimately, the Smith family chose to remain on their ranch at the confluence of the Elk Creek and the South Fork of the Salmon River. In 1887, reports noted that Smith had bought out Sim Wiley's interest in the bridge at the mouth of Elk Creek and the Alton Trail and was living there with one of his 4 sons. That same year, the bridge was washed out by high water and travelers were ferried across by boat, yet another reminder of how fragile frontier infrastructure could be. Even in his later years, Smith never stopped prospecting. In 1889, he was among those credited with discovering a new placer find far beyond the Alton district, deep in the mountains. Newspapers described him as an old prospector and a good judge of a mining camp, someone whose instincts had been sharpened by decades in the wilderness. But frontier life remained unforgiving. In February of 1890, tragedy struck the Smith family when 14-year-old Robert Bobby Smith attempted to carry the mail from Warren's to the Alton district after the regular mail carrier failed to make the run. A blizzard closed in. When Bobby did not return, searchers scoured the mountains. His body was not found until spring. He had succumbed to the cold and lay undisturbed in the trail. He was buried on the Smith Ranch along the South Fork. Despite the hardship, Smith remained a fixture of the region. An 1890 newspaper account noted him and his family traveling to Warren's on Election Day, boasting of massive trout, enormous potatoes, and a life still rooted in the land. The last published description of him, from October of 1891, paints a remarkably peaceful picture. Smith dividing his time between mining and raising watermelons, sunflowers towering over his homestead, and visitors leaving with, quote, lively and pleasant memories of his home. The following spring, on the 20th of April, 1892, Sylvester S. Three-Fingered Smith died on the South Fork of the Salmon River at the age of 63. Knowing the end was near, he ordered his coffin to be made from sluice boxes. He was wrapped in a buffalo robe and buried among the mountains he had lived in for most of his life. His obituary remembered a man who likely made more money from placer mining in Idaho County than almost anyone else, and yet died poor, not from mismanagement, but from generosity. Half his house and food were always open to the needy. Nearly every miner on the river attended his funeral. The paper called it a natural and fitting scene, the passing of a true pioneer. Today, Three-Fingered Smith rests in a small cemetery near Elk Creek, his grave marked quietly in the wilderness he helped shape. He was not a saint, not a simple hero, but a survivor, a provider, and a man who embodied the hard contradictions of the Old West. And in many ways, that makes him exactly the kind of story worth remembering. I hope y'all enjoyed this episode on Sylvester Three-Fingered Smith. If you did, please give a like and maybe subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, please give a 5-star rating and hit that follow button. All of this really helps me grow and reach new listeners. And as always, I appreciate everyone's support. I can't say that enough. If y'all haven't checked out the Spotify, please go give it a try. I have an 8-part series on both the legendary lawman Bass Reeves and the jolly mountain man Joe Meek. Join the membership family. For just $1, you'll get access to bonus content like the Honeywell gunfight and the first stagecoach robbery in U.S. history. And as always, thank you to the membership family. You are noticed and greatly appreciated. We will see y'all next time. And remember, when in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.